want to welcome everyone to another edition of EdVenture. Today, I'm excited to introduce Ruben Cantu, who is the director of the Inclusive Innovation and Entrepreneurship program at the University of Texas. This particular program has a particular connection to me because I knew about it when in its early insurgency, and years later, to see the work that's been done by Ruben, I just thought it was time for us to have this conversation about all the great things that has emerged from this program. Welcome, Ruben, to EdVenture.
Thank you very much for having me here.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think you and I just talked about how I remember when this idea of inclusive innovation took shape off of a presentation that I did, and it seems like that our mutual friend, Dr. Moore, took the concept and ran with it. He got really excited. But at that time, there was only one person that he focused in on that he felt could fill the shoes of this big idea. And that was you for this project. So it's been a couple of years now, and I thought it'd be just fun to just kind of learn about all of the great things that are going on here. So first, can you just tell us how you are now defining inclusive innovation and entrepreneurship program? Because I know that it may mean a little bit something different from the times that it was initially conceived.
You know, it's funny because the term has now proliferated around the country. I was recently at a venture well conference called Open in DC about 2 months ago, and the conversation was there, and the term was being used,
Mm,
and they were looking to us to identify and learn more about how do we actually do inclusive innovation. So it's quite inspiring to meet my peers, know that they're trying to do similar work, and then having them look to us as an example of what it looks like. To me, it's modified to a degree, but at the end of the day, the simplest definition for any layman is to say innovation at the heart of it is not true innovation unless it's inclusive.
mm,
When we identify innovation, much of it has been created in silos, in corporations, in think tanks, in universities, but oftentimes it's there to support the privileged. Rarely do we have innovation that's created that supports as a societal benefit.
absolutely.
And so inclusive innovation really becomes the epitome and the highest form of innovation because there's a term that says nothing about us without us. It's an equity term that's used.
Hmm.
And so, how do we actually plan to build a new society without actually incorporating those people in society? One of the biggest critiques I received when I first came in, they said, great, you're going to focus on the Black community. You're going to focus on the Latino community. You're going to focus on these other cultural identifiers. What about those with different accessibility and those in the age range above 40? And when I first came in, I heard it and I was caught off because it's not that I was excluding them, but I had to focus in on a particular section of the society. We're now growing to the point where we're starting to blend in and incorporate more of those voices. And so there's more of a desire and effort, not just from our office, but from the entire community to have these different sectors collaborate with each other. So you have more Black and Brown collaboration, you have more differently abled, and and those who are in, I'll call them the more experienced generation
Hmm.
combining together
Yeah,
to support each other. All that being said, is inclusive innovation will continue evolving, but where we are right now is being intentional about the conversation, not just the programming, but the conversation, saying who is being left out. Dr. Moore inspired me to continue working in the community. Say, go figure out what's going to be most needed during COVID-19
mm,
without me knowing we created a nonprofit. It was a think and action tank that made sure that we brought in not only treetops. What I mean by that is prestigious figures in our community, leaders from the city, county, state, etc., but we brought them together with grassroots.
Hmm.
Had never been done before, and to collaborate on making sure that Black and Brown communities were addressed. And it taught me so much over the past 3 years about how inclusive innovation is actually done on the ground and how you have to work carefully to try to keep these different constituencies working together. So it's trial by fire, but it's been a great experience over the past now 5 years.
Yeah, wow, it's been 5 years. That's fantastic because, and I think you said something that really resonated with me. And I think that, sometimes when you say inclusion or or with respect to inclusive innovation, it is about, bringing more people into the conversation, into the process of collaboration. Um, but sometimes, it can get sticky when you're kind of surrounded with identity politics because, inclusion can be a long line of things. That can be a continuum. And what I find is that sometimes instead of really looking at inclusion from the standpoint of how many different identity groups can be touched, is really looking horizontally at, what are the issues that actually end up touching people. For example, when I think of at the University of Texas, when we first started having these conversations, it was around the achievement gap, and that's something that, yes, you could speak to brown and black kids, but you can also speak to rural white kids and a bunch of other folks. So, when I think of inclusion, I think it's an ongoing um, definition when it comes to innovation because there's just so many different people that will have their hands raised when it comes to how you look at bringing people in and solving these problems. Um, Go ahead. You had something to say there. Go for it.
If I could sum it up even in a simpler word,
Sure.
is the word compassion.
Yeah.
Because while we initially started to work to address Black and Brown issues and help advance them into a path of generational wealth, which is happening right now as we speak, the real invitation of inclusive innovation is for us first to have and get to a point where we can have compassion for one another, for especially for those communities who don't identify with other type of adjacent communities,
Mhm.
but are all under this, dare I say, oppressive system,
Mhm.
marginalized system that has them fighting for breadcrumbs. And when we can have compassion for each other and our brothers and sisters, we can then start creating from a place of creativity instead of scarcity. And that's what we've been trying to role model in
I
this
love
office
it.
for a while.
I love it. And I think that's what people sometimes forget about the role of innovation is that it's something that actually is generating abundance. That scarcity model makes us tribal, go into our tribal groups and calcify us in these different identities, looking for the breadcrumbs that comes out of scarcity. But that innovation is really about, how can you create abundance through through exponential growth, through exponential a lot of things there. So I love it. So let's talk a little bit about this program. It's been 5 years now, and wow, the time goes by fast. Um,
I
can
had
you just,
shorter hair.
yeah, can you just share with us what is the program? What does that look like today? The Inclusive and Innovation in Entrepreneurship program.
The Office of Inclusive Innovation is set
Office,
up to create
yes.
a pathway.
Yep.
Yeah, the Office of Inclusive Innovation is set up to create a pathway for generational wealth for first gen, low income, and diverse students. And we do this through two undergraduate signature programs that are 4 credit. They're ultimately 2 years in length now. We've expanded it, which is beautiful. The first one is in tech, startups, and product management.
Mhm.
Students learn how to create a company from scratch. It's called the Product Prodigy Institute. It
Mhm.
teaches product management principles, agile theory, lean, and also design principles, where students actually take a concept that they want to take on for themselves inside of a team and then bring it out to the real market. And so over the next 2 years, 4 semesters, not only do they earn credit and get qualified for seed funding, but they actually understand what it's like to own the product. It's not a
Wow.
theoretical thing. It's
Sure.
something that they take on for themselves, and our students have transitioned that into other accelerators, got funding, and now have been hired at tech companies in product management. Some of the top names in the business, Fortune 5 companies making well over six-figure salaries. So their lives has changed.
Wow.
The second
So
program,
go for it. But before you go into the second program, I just want to ask, so what year are these students at UT? Do they come in? Is this a first, second, third, or fourth year experience?
it ranges. I now find that the earlier I get them, the more I can influence them and mold them, and set them down a path. Usually, when they're in their later junior and senior year, it's a little bit harder. It's not impossible. We have seen some remarkable stories still, but the earlier we can get, the better, because we spend about maybe a month and a half, a bit a little longer, and it's also interwoven through the curriculum about ethics and leadership.
Hmm.
So it's not just theoretical concepts about business. It's not just hard skills about learning how to build a company, but it's actual real conversations about leadership ethics, how to embrace conflict, and how to actually become your fullest version of yourself as a human being.
Mm,
That helps change the entire dynamic. And what emerges is not something that typically emerges from traditional business schools.
that's great.
Um, so hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. So in this program, what does it look like on the ground? So you said it's a 2 semester program. How many units do they get per semester? And
It's a
how are those
2 year
courses laid
program.
out?
It's a 2 year program, 4 semesters, 3 credit hours each. So total of 12 hours. It counts towards their entrepreneurship minor inside of the School of Business.
Oh, wow, that's great.
Um, yes. And what was the last part of the question?
And so how are those, so how is the curriculum laid out, let's say through the first couple of years? What are they taking?
Yeah. So the first semester, really, we call it prototype. They learn the market basics of understanding how business works, the dynamics, and they learn customer discovery. So we literally take them out there to the real world. I take them to the mall and other places, and they have to go talk to strangers.
That's great.
And they are overwhelmed, and they're like, "Why are you making us do this? This is not fun." But soon they like get the hang of it, and you're like, "Oh, I can talk to anyone." Yes, exactly. Once
Yeah,
they build that skill up, they're unstoppable because they become insanely curious, and there's less of a fear of failure, which makes them start imagining things that are kind of crazy in nature, but they end up creating something that they would have never they created before. So the first semester really is about understanding design principles, human-centered design, lean startup, and then we still start incorporating some product management principles, but we actually leave that to the second semester. Second semester is called MVP, and
yeah,
MVP is really about them taking what they've actually thought and designed and prototyped and building the hard pieces together. So when I push a button here, something pops out over here on this side. So they take it from their mind and actually bring it to real life, whether it's a tech product, whether it's a service, whether it's an experience, but it's something that's real. It has a business model, and the goal is to get it in front of consumers and really start teasing it out. The last semester is a deeper practicum where they get one-on-one coaching from the 2 semesters called Soar and Execute. And what ends up happening in those semesters is they are now getting one-on-one coaching and expanding and growing and taking their idea to the next level. Sometimes they have to pivot, they have to do the previous year's work again. But in that process, the more they do it, just like no one knew how to ride a bike when they first got on it,
right.
the more they do it, they skin their knees, the faster they get back up. And so we're building an agility muscle inside of them where they're like super confident. And you'll see students who are super shy come out and transition. They're like, wait, I don't even recognize that person.
Wow,
That's the same person, but they've grown through the process.
that's great. So your second program, I know I cut you off there, but there's a second part of your office in terms of your programs. You mentioned the Prodigy Institute, but then Prodigy Product Institute, and then there's a second one.
Yeah, so in adjacent to the Product Prodigy Institute, we have a program that's even more tailored and centered on a demographic that is often overlooked and um, underrepresented, which is not just women, but women of color.
Hmm.
While this program is open to everyone, we target the conversation and move in that direction because when you look at the stats and the numbers, not only is it harder for women to navigate and matriculate up the corporate ladder, but if you're a woman of color, it's even harder than that. And if you're a woman who identifies in a non binary space, it's even harder than that. Now, imagine you translate that into the venture world, like where you're at,
Hmm.
and trying to raise funding. Less than 1% of venture capital goes to women of color, or actually Black women. And so when we look at the Fortune 500 layout, and you have like a couple exceptions, but the majority is a very homogenous representation, we have to ask ourselves, is this the accurate representation of who we are as a country? And because our demographics are changing into the future, is this who we want to say that we still are? How have we created ways for more visibility, for us to see ourselves and what's possible? Not to digress, but as an example, there's big controversy not only about Cleopatra that's just coming out, this documentary, but also the Little Mermaid, about them having Black representation in these figures. I think it's a great idea. Some people are losing their mind; they cannot
Right.
handle it. But we need to start seeing us in positions of notoriety, of celebration, and of power. It's healthy for the entire society. It allows us to become a much more healed and connected society. So exactly what we're trying to do is we're trying to create the executives of tomorrow who are women of color. And so it's called Wield Texas, the
What is it?
Women's
Excuse me?
Initiative. Wield Texas,
Hmm.
the Women's Initiative for Entrepreneurship and Leadership Development. And like it targets women of color, we accept everyone, but it's a 2 year program. And this program, similar to the Product Prodigy Institute, does teach entrepreneurship, but it doesn't do it specifically for tech. Women have the opportunity to learn through the curriculum and then transition into nonprofit, government, or private sector roles. They get paired with mentors just like the other program, but now there's a more heart centered, holistic, entrepreneurial approach in teaching. We embrace conversations that are non traditional in academic settings about leadership, about identity, about understanding how to work and navigate the corporate world. And we allow them to be themselves. We allow them to emerge and
Sure.
have a space where they feel that they can ask questions that normally they wouldn't ask in an academic setting. I
Sure.
found this on the web.
So I would love to follow up with you on that because I know that these are kind of topics that are popping up, especially on campuses, and some of them are a little bit have a little bit more heat around those than others. But as you kind of mentioned the women of color, but already you're running an inclusive program. Why do you feel this need to kind of create more isolation instead of um, allowing for it to be one big program? Because actually, when I think about this, I would imagine that there's not a lot of disparity between the challenges of a Latino male and a Latino black male, excuse me, and a black male. And so why that this type of preferential treatment versus having something that would just kind of be in an inclusive place?
I'm so glad you asked that. And I think that's what gets misinterpreted or misplaced in them looking at it as a preferential treatment. What we're trying to do is create a space where these women who normally never have a space to call their own, right, can actually embrace and grow and flourish and try and be vulnerable in a new space that they normally would never be. What I've realized is when we're constrained, when we're having to be compliant, where we're
Hmm.
constricted, we are not creative. But when we're vulnerable, it creates the space of learning and growth and creativity. By creating a space where they can see themselves and encourage themselves. It creates a safety element and allows them to try things that they normally wouldn't try in an open space, right? Even though it technically we accept everyone, we still support their growth, um, because the transformation we're trying to create from someone who traditionally may not have got that nurturing or support in early years of venturing out and trying new things, we're trying to transition into an executive level thinker and executor. And that takes a little bit of work. And that's why the program's several semesters. But what we've seen happen are students take the program, end up working at NASA and Congress under the Secretary General of the United Nations, going to get their master's in Oxford for a free ride in diplomacy, working at top investment firms, getting their startups funded, things that we would have never imagined from a community who had never come from entrepreneurial backgrounds. This is what's possible and this is what's happening. And so the thesis is working. We need the larger collective society to say, hey, it's not that we're having pity on anyone. We're saying we want to be intentional about the world we want to create, and women are 50% or more of the world. Women of color are going to be a majority of our community. Latino women are the fastest growing sector of women who are starting businesses in Texas and in Austin. We need to make sure that our women of color have the training and equipping them to be able to lead for the future. Because I won't be here in another 100 years, but our community must thrive collectively.
I see. Well, this sounds like a great program, and the only thing I would add to this is that young boys and men, more particularly in general, and more particularly more Black men and Black boys and Latino boys, they're doing worse than ever in society. They're not they're the lowest group that are getting entry into colleges, and a lot of social challenges around mental health and suicide. So I just I just want to keep in mind that there are a lot of folks that fits under this inclusive umbrella that definitely needs the support in that respect. So I want to ask you, one of the things you mentioned, and I think it's really fantastic, is that some of these students are getting funding for some of their projects, some of their startups. How is that funding set up? And then can you just name a couple of the type of initiatives or companies that you find your students developing and creating?
Yes. So there's a small portion of scholarship funding that we give at the end of the semester for those demo days. But then what we encourage them to go do is sign up for adjacent accelerators and pitch competitions where they win prizes up to 5, 10, 15, sometimes $20,000.
Mhm.
And so what we're doing is creating an ecosystem and helping them matriculate into those spaces.
That's great.
Two, the kind of companies that are being formed are often companies that aren't just like a B2B, like big corporate, we want to solve this issue for big corporations. They're ventures that are uniquely placed in terms of what they and their community are facing. So from our first year of the cohort of 2019, a company called Remain, Remane, like your main, like
Yeah.
Remain. Uh, these two young Black women decided to create initially a toolkit for women of color who want to go all natural with their
Mhm.
hair. As they expanded, they created a community. They launched an app, and they were able to get funding and get major publicity for their venture. That was one of our pride and joys. Since
Wow.
then, we've had other companies emerge from that. Uh, what I will say is that every company is a stepping stone to the next company.
Sure.
So, and every job is an opportunity for the next job. So our students have now transitioned and starting and pivoted and starting new ventures because they've learned more from it. But the process has continued to grow. This past demo day, the winner, believe it or not, I didn't know if this was actually going to work or not, but we found out that uh, the company that won in the Product Prodigy Institute program was called Snapwish.
Mm.
And the basic concept is students need to figure out how to rent special occasion attire and wardrobe, similar to Rent the Runway. So they created a peer-to-peer rental platform that
Wow.
allows them to be able to exchange wardrobe at a very affordable rate for parties or special occasions because they're on a budget.
Yeah,
Great idea, and the company's continuing to evolve from there.
that's fantastic. So, I have a couple of questions that that are more specific to the students of color, because we know that a lot of times our students come from environments where um, they're they're kind of told to take the traditional route as the most safest way to change their lives, and a lot of that is kind of based on this idea of the fear of failure, and we know that that is a major piece for any student of these generations, but more particularly for students of color, kind of based on their need and desire to get like real work. What do you do to support them to kind of embrace this idea that failure is growth, failure is a learning experience? How do you kind of tackle the challenge of fear of failure?
I have them literally create small challenges for themselves on an incremental basis. Like I
Hmm.
literally, one of the first exercises is we're gonna go and sit at the mall. You're gonna see me fail in front of you, potentially.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
gonna go talk to strangers. I'm gonna get shut down. Y'all get to giggle at me, but you're gonna see your own professor on the line because I'm not scared of failing. I don't care if someone shuts me down or not.
Yeah,
You're gonna see me lead by example, and when they see me do it, they follow along and they feel much safer. It's about creating a place of safety
sure.
and support, and ultimately the undercurrent of love. When they know that there's nothing they can do that would take my love away from them, they're free to go ahead and roam about the
Wow, I
cabin.
love that. Yeah, I love that. That's fantastic, and that's a different way that a professor gets to participate in real experiential learning. That's great. So also you talked about an ecosystem. Who's in this particular ecosystem that your office have designed and cultivated that helps these students matriculate into these opportunities and support their learning and development?
Two accelerators that we've been in conversation with. The landscape in Austin is ever changing in terms of accelerators. But two that have reached out and have built partnership with us is Target. Believe it or not, I didn't even know Target, the store, had an accelerator, but they found
Yeah.
out about us and they said, we like Remain. We're going to take Remain in our inaugural accelerator program. And they flew them out to Minneapolis. Isn't that cool?
Wow.
Uh, and the second one was Techstars. Techstars is known as one of the
Yep.
two top accelerator programs and organizations in the country.
Yep.
And they have created a pathway so that we can easily recommend our students into their pipeline as well.
That's great. That's fantastic. So this program is 2 years. What are some of the other things they do? It sounds like you take trips. I know you just recently came back from the Silicon Valley with a group of students. How does those type of events play into their learning experience?
Up until that point, and mind you, because we work with first gen, often low income students, some of them have never been on a plane before. So
Yeah,
even
yeah.
leaving the house for more than a week, they've never done that before. But it's pretty transformational. Um, the reason we do it, not only do we take them to Silicon Valley, we take them here locally to tech companies so they can meet real executives and product
Yep.
managers and people who are in tech so they can see and touch them, get their email addresses, build a relationship.
Yeah.
But we take them out there so they can feel the different vibe of what exists in Silicon Valley compared to Austin and compared to other places so that they know that they are not limited to this little bubble called UT or this city called Austin.
Hmm.
And so We want them to know that anything is possible. When we took the very first class in 2019 out there, they didn't know what to expect. And initially they came back like, oh, we like it, but we don't know if we're going to live there. Three of them have moved out there. One of them's working for Atlassian, other one's working for LinkedIn, the other one's working for
Wow.
Intuit. They're making over six-figure salaries. Their lives have transformed.
Yeah.
These people had never been on airplanes before, and like they're living the dream and the vision of what this program initially started out to be.
That's fantastic. And so, so what are you imagining for the future of this program? It sounds like it's come a long way. Is there do you have events that you do throughout the year, or what else fills up the programmatic content of your office?
We obviously start a new cohort with an opening retreat, opening weekend,
Yep.
where they come in as strangers and they build as teams. At the end of every semester, they end up doing a showcase. We'll call it a demo day, similar to a Shark, much more rigorous, more involved. And so we have that. We take them on site trips to tech companies. And then we also have guest lecturers come into the class. The cool thing about this, Ahmad, is that our students from the class of 19 are now coming back to guest lecture
Wow,
the
that's
current
great.
cohorts. And it makes me feel so proud. I sit in the back of the class and they're teaching them UX design. And I was like, look at that. And so
Yeah.
it's really beautiful to see it come full circle. Um, in terms of other programmatic elements, we have internship support. So we reference them and place them into internship
Mhm.
roles and product. And also we support them in identifying and pairing up with mentors who want to help them advance their careers.
That's fantastic. So one last question here, and this is, as I've, so the questions that are popping up around these issues with universities and the value of universities relative to cultivating the talents and for future careers of students. There's a little critique around whether universities are preparing students for future of work opportunities. And it sounds like your program has really kind of taken on this idea of cultivating talent. What type of feedback have you received from the university as kind of an example of where they would like to go with developing the talent of students, or are they looking at your program as an example to scale university wide?
I think that they're very astonished and impressed with the caliber of student that comes out of our program. So that's a compliment. But I think the distinction that my program is not like any other academic program
Mhm.
um, at the University of Texas, or probably, you know, in most universities. I focus more. Not so yes, we have technical training. Yes, they understand these technical skills that they need to be able to show that they can build a company. But if you really think about this, it's a mindset that we're actually training. It's a
Absolutely.
emotional leadership
Yep.
development. And most colleges are not there yet. They're like, we need to teach them hard skills so they can get employed. And I'm told my students, I'm not just trying to get you employed. I'm training you how to think as an executive, how to think about the overall picture, and how to be responsible for it. And you don't have to figure it out all today, but your goal is to figure out how to be the best problem solver as possible. So that way, when you do enter not only the workforce, but the real world, you're not just seen as a commodity. You're like, oh, I can hire somebody else who can do your skills. You're irreplaceable because of the way you think and problem solve.
I love it. And some of the work that I do at Future Point is that we focus in on developing individuals' unique capabilities, and I think that's what I'm hearing you say, that's more important than trying to get someone prepared for a particular type of organization or sector, but someone who can really see their own capabilities as part of their sense of self-agency and purpose and fulfillment, et cetera, and really value a global value. that plays into it. So before we get out of here, let's hear a little bit about yourself. We know that before you came to the university, I know you're a graduate of the University of Texas, but you had your foot, your toe in the kind of social impact and entrepreneurial space prior to University of Texas. Can you just tell us a little bit about what you were doing and what drove you to kind of take this position and do this great work?
Thank you. I think everything's cyclical, right? So when I was in grad school at UT, we had the Great Recession. And I started seeing that, well, the evidence all showed that this was a self-inflicted wound on our economy. We willfully knew that we were selling toxic notes and passing the buck until we figured out when the house of cards was going to fall.
Yeah.
It made me very disappointed in knowing that I was being trained in a capitalistic society to know how to play the game, but this is how the game is played. And I make a decision for myself. Am I going to perpetuate the same mindset and lifestyle? Or are we going to be responsible about creating companies that are not just about extracting and maximizing profit, but actually about taking care of people and their well-being?
Wow.
And I made a decision and I pivoted. I said, until we actually learn how to be a full sentient society that is responsible for our brother, being our brother's keeper, we're going to continue hurting each other and we're going to continue to perpetuate trauma. These are new terms that I didn't have at that time, but now I'm saying it. In 2013, we launched Austin's first social impact incubator, and it ran for 3 years. We also, that same year, created a programming track at South by Southwest on social impact that didn't exist before then, and that grew. In 2015, we created a high school version for Title I students. For some of the people who don't know what Title I means, it means schools that have a large socioeconomic population that need subsidies of sorts. Like think about free or reduced school lunch. And that was very successful. And it ran, and the Hispanic Chamber took it over. In 2016, I decided to pilot my own version for college students. And we found a nonprofit that works with first-gen low-income students. Many of them were DACA students. And for those who are watching this who don't know what DACA is, it means Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. There was an Obama policy that allowed undocumented students to stay in the country. And so we took that first cohort and trained them on a primitive or a very limited version of what we have today over 12 weeks. They launched a company. They ended up getting hired at companies making six-figure salaries.
Wow.
And then we realized, hold on, I think we got something here. And so we continued on, and the tradition builds on from there. And so it's not just about building wealth. It's about creating impact and leaving a legacy. We actually need communal healing. But in order for us to have healing, we need to have people who are equipped to reinvest into our communities. And in order to do that, we need to equip them to be able to play the game.
That's great. Well, Ruben, I want to thank you for your time. It sounds, from our conversation, it sounds like this was the last day of the semester for you too. So I want to also wish you a happy summer, and whatever your endeavors are, to get yourself some rest after, like I said, I'm a former college dean and an adjunct professor myself. I know that these semesters, as much as we love doing the work, can be extremely draining on our well-being. So wishing you a little self-care, my friend, and look forward to connecting up with you.
Thank you so much, Ahmad.
You got it. Thank you.